later in this episode.
And I had prayed the prayer like, Lord, I can't break up with her, but I'm ready to submit to what you have for me. Like, I'm ready to go all in to serve you. Like, I want to do whatever you have planned for me. Like, my plans are not working. So you hear my heart. My only request, Lord, is that you would cause her to break up with me. Like, I can't break up with her right now. And the very next day, I mean, God showed up. Like,
Welcome to today's episode of This Is My Story podcast, brought to you by Victory Church. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Josiah Bender. Josiah, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, no, it's an honor. It's a beautiful studio we have here.
Yes, it is. And today, we're going to be talking about Josiah's story and his life of growing up in the church, giving his life to the Lord, but then falling into drugs, into pills, into the search of fame, fortune, money, and those things that so many people just get drawn into. And he's going to tell us today of how God radically changed his life and what he's doing today and how God's continuing to bless him in this. So, Josiah, thanks for being here today. What I want to hear first is tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up. What was it like being in a Christian household, giving your life to Christ at such a young age?
Yeah, no, it was definitely a very ideal situation for somebody to be successful. I grew up kind of sheltered a little bit in a good way. Grew up with very Christian family. My dad was the worship pastor and worked at Sight and Sound, the local theater, and my mom worked kind of all over, but part-time, but dedicated a lot of time to being with us. So I felt really loved, really accepted, and my early age was really marked by just like it was perfect. Like life was really good. So
in some ways, and I know we'll talk a little later about what the modern American dream looks like, but that kind of sounds like it. Like you said, the ideal situation to grow up in, a loving family, a mom that's home and part-time working, but there to care for the family. The dad who's a leader in the church, who's caring for his family well, who's well respected in the community. So what was that like? Being a kid then, growing up in that, like what did that feel like? Because I know myself, I'm a grandpastor's kid. I don't know how the language of that is. My grandfather's a pastor. My wife is a pastor's kid, a PK. So growing up in that, what did that feel like for other PKs that are listening out there and can relate to this, or people that have never felt what that felt like?
Yeah, I mean, it was good, but there was definitely a lot of like pressure to be good. Everybody around you is like perfect, it seems, as you're growing up. So there is a lot of pressure to sort of perform and be a certain way, and ultimately as a child you're not there yet. So
and that's something that for me growing up, and it was so interesting, like looking back now, so many people never verbally put that pressure on me, and I think some of that pressure actually came from myself. Where your perspective is seeing all these people around you doing these great things, being great, and you're like, well, now I have to do this, and if I make any mistakes, then my life's going to fall apart, and I'm never going to reach up to that, or I'm going to let somebody down.
Right.
So that's so hard when you're growing up in a family like that, especially in the church, leadership in the church. Like kids out there that are growing up, maybe listening, that are in those kind of families, like, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. Because a lot of times it's you who's putting those expectations on and not anybody else. So be who God's called you to be. So that was my little nugget for that.
Yeah, that's good.
So tell us a little bit. So we know your story, as we kind of alluded to, starts to shift a little bit. So you grow up in this home, you give your heart to the Lord. Where does Josiah start to seek things outside of the church, outside of family? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, as I said, growing up, it was always my goal to be good. And I was able to do that when I was young because I wasn't quite able to fall into the temptations that would soon arise. But at a certain point, I kind of began to give in to some of those things, pornography being one of them. Yeah. And that was a sin that was really tough for me because, again, I was sort of trying to put on this image of like perfection to others, right? I wanted to measure up, and it kept me from doing that. And I began to sort of live this double life where to everybody else it looked like everything was fine, but deep down I was really, really struggling.
Yeah. And sexuality, pornography, like those things have such deep roots, and people don't recognize that, and how easy it is to fall prey to that. And that's something that the devil is going to continue to come after, whether it's gender confusion, whether it's premarital sex, whether it's pornography, whatever that looks like, to pervert sex and sexuality. And when people fall to that, I know from experience, like, you just feel like the scum of the earth when that happens.
Right.
There's so much shame that comes with that, so much guilt. And especially when you're in a position like yours, where you're within the church, like, you feel like, well, nobody else is struggling with this. And so many times we get caught up in that mentally, that nobody else is struggling with this. I'm the only one. And we start to pull ourselves back, and we start to hide because of that shame. Just like Adam and Eve did in the garden. Like, they sinned. What do? They began to hide because of that shame that they felt.
Right.
And that's what we do in our own lives so many times when we fall to something like that, specifically pornography.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, my response to sort of that shame was, okay, like, I can't be good enough in the church. Like, I can't be good enough for God. So I'll be good enough in a different way. Yep. So that's kind of what led me into this next portion of my life, where it's like, okay, if I can't succeed spiritually, let's succeed materialistically. So I started to idolize people who had this, incredible amount of wealth and had all these women and this whole lifestyle that you see sort of in like Los Angeles and Miami. Like, you kind of see this like influencer lifestyle. And I began to idolize that, and that's where all of my energy went. It was seeking fame, seeking fortune, and I started to, actually kind of have an outlet for that as I started to get into social media. Even at the age of 13, 14, it was like 20, 30 hours a week I was spending on my phone, just, trying to build up this following. Yeah,
it's a neat thing in some ways, but it's scary in other ways that kids have such power and can gain so much power. And you see that so many times. Like, my kids, I have young kids, they watch YouTube, and there's little kids playing games and doing stuff, and like the amount of power and pressure that goes on to these kids then, and I think the parents and even the kids don't realize they even have the amount of influence that they have, and how easily it can warp their opinions, how they see things, how they view things. So that's such a scary place to actually be once you start to get there, I think. Is just that spot of, okay, I really want this. I'm starting to see some of this. Now I got to have it. And now this is all that I want and all I'm going after.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of played off of the way that, all human brains are built. We see it as the more likes came in, the more followers came in. It was just a continuous surge of dopamine in my brain that just kept sort of drawing me to this. It was actually an addiction to this fame, to this money. And, the money didn't really come in for a few years later. And that was when, honestly, things got worse. But as the fame started to build up, and it wasn't even me, I was just running like a meme page. But as this meme page started to grow and grow and grow, it almost confirmed that what I was doing was good. Like, my parents, who didn't know what was actually going on in the DMs and all that stuff with women, like, they just saw the following, and they were sort of like, wow, this is actually really cool. Like, you're Josiah, like, you're a business guy, like, business mind. And I
entrepreneur.
Right. So I sort of felt this pressure, like, okay, that's me. Like, that's who I am.
Yeah.
And that reinforced this desire to grow even more and more and to make even more money. So that's sort of where things kind of shifted, is, okay, now let's get famous. Let's make money. Let's be the entrepreneur.
Yeah. So where are you at in your relationship with God at this point? So you said you gave your life to Christ as a young kid. Where are you at now in these teenage years, starting to seek this fame, starting to seek this money?
Yeah, well, it was sort of a downhill spiral, because initially, as I was introduced to pornography, my relationship with God definitely took a toll. And unfortunately, as time went on, that sort of became normal. So there were times in this season where I would go to like retreats with the church, and I would say, I really want to commit my life to the Lord, and I might stop, watching porn for a few weeks and feel like really good. But the second that came back in, it was just an immediate damaged my relationship with the Lord, and it wasn't really the same as it ever was. So it was just continuous, just sacrifice after sacrifice for this fame, for this fortune that just caused destruction, in my relationship with God.
Yeah, wow. So you're beginning to see this success, you're beginning to see this fame in your life and this money coming in. What kind of toll does that take next? Where does that take you next in your life and in your story?
Yeah, so after that, I'd say all, fame and fortune, it's a drug. And it built this ego in my head to where, again, this is who I am. And not only this is who I am, but I'm really, really good at it.
Yeah.
So now I start there were many days where I was envisioning myself in Los Angeles doing all these things, like having this team of networkers. And it took me down a really dark path, because the bigger I grew, the more I was open to different kinds of advertisements. And unfortunately, I started to really sacrifice my morals and started advertising like models basically in the porn industry. And that's where the most money was, but that's where my like mental health, my relationship with God took a hit, because not only now like did I start this meme page with the good goal of trying to make people laugh, but now it's like now I'm leading others into this addiction. Like now the enemy's really using me. He kind of got me with this bait of money, and now he's using me to really lead people down a dark path.
Yeah. And again, speaking to people who may be like, I want to be a part of an influencer page, I want to be a part of this. Like, did you see those signs early on, or did this kind of just take you by a whirlwind and start pulling you down that? For people that, again, might be wanting to step into that, like, did you see warning signs, or it kind of just pulled you away? Yeah,
it was never the goal was never to be advertising, porn stars, but that's like I would have never started if I knew I was going to get to that part. Yeah. But being an influencer is not a bad thing. Yeah. Like I didn't have the self-control at the time to do it correctly. Yeah. And I don't think many teenagers do. So I think it's dangerous. And I think that, in most cases, the enemy will have you sacrifice just little by little by little until you're somewhere that you never thought you would be. And that was the case for me. Yep. And that's, again, back to that point of so many kids, and like I see those things online, and I'm like, man, I pray for some of these families. Like, Lord, protect these kids, protect these families, whether they know you or not. Like, have somebody step into their path that knows you and can speak the gospel to them. But no matter where they are, protect these kids and their minds and their morals and where they are, because that's so easy to fall down that slippery slope once you start to taste that success. How fast you can move and how fast you can be corrupted. And the devil's going to come after you because he sees the influence you have and how many people you can now pull down with you as well. Yeah. Or people who may not even been on that path yet, and they just go, hey, this is a funny meme. Oh, whoa, this is what I meant to look at right now. Right. Yep. And how fast that can pull them down into that. So from there, then you begin. I know you graduate school. I think it was early at that point. Right. Yeah. So what comes next then after graduation? So you're still with your family at this point. You're seeing this online success. Did they know how successful you had become at that point? Yeah. So they knew I was, and this is kind of where things take a turn, is they knew I was like making a lot of money. Yeah. I was actually using my parents' like PayPal at the time to make money. So like it was a significant amount of money that was coming in, and I had to get my own accountant and do all these things. And my mom and my dad knew that what I was doing wasn't good. They didn't know the extent of what I was doing. I don't even know if they know the extent to what I was doing even now. Praise God, I am where I am today, and God's good. But amen. But I was hiding a lot of things from them. But what they did know is that I wasn't seeking the Lord. Like they knew something had switched, and that's where they actually asked me to move out. And it wasn't like they were kicking me out, but it was like, hey, we think it'd be beneficial for you to kind of go on your own and sort of experience life without this sort of shield that I was under their roof. Yeah. That's I mean, people can look at that many different ways, but that's really good parenting. Absolutely. To say, hey, you know what? Like, we're not going to try to control this. We're not going to try to put our hands on this. Like, God has this. And knowing your parents, I know they were praying for you, and they knew God's got this turnaround. God's got this story in the palm of his hands. Yeah. And to have that control as a parent to say, you know what? He needs to see this happen in his life for God to change his mind, to change his views of things. Yeah. And I think that also helps knowing you had other family members at home that's able to protect them as well from bringing that into the home then. Yeah, and to that point, like, I was really blessed with great parents. Yeah. So one thing I forgot to mention is, around the age of 16, 17 is where like my drug use sort of picked up. So, started with marijuana here and there. But the biggest thing for me was, nicotine, like vaping. That was a big thing in high schools. It still is. Yeah. I think it's a drug that it's so addicting and builds patterns in your brains that, like, as a young person, like, if you're struggling with that, like, that is the one thing that is going to really destroy your life. Like that, and then with everything else that was going on, I built this pattern of seeking pleasure quickly, like instant gratification. So I was struggling a lot with like food addiction, with gluttony, with just eating too much, eating just for pleasure, not for, energy. And that's another big part of my testimony. But as I was getting into this sort of drug phase, I remember there were nights where I would come home like still sort of high and walk down my basement stairs. It was 2 a.m. and my dad would be there praying like out loud. He'd be like, "Hey, I'm just praying for you, Josiah." Like many, many mornings I would come home and I was just like, "Dude, like, like stop. Like,
go to bed, man."
Yeah. Like, why are you still up? It's 2 a.m. But looking back on that, like that was just such a good example of he's in the private place, but he's there. Yeah. And it was just such a good reminder that like God is still sovereign in my situation. Even though I'm like running away like Jonah, like God is still there.
Yep. Yeah. That's so good. That's such a great biblical analogy too, is of Jonah. And it's funny, I was rereading this year in my Bible plan, and as I was reading Jonah, like I always think of him as like this hero. And I was reading and I was like, this guy's kind of scummy in some ways. He's like, "No, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that." But like you said, God still had his hand, no matter how Jonah was operating, no matter how he was thinking, like God still had his hand over that situation, and God's will was still going to be done. No matter how hard Jonah resisted, no matter how hard he tried to run away, God still had control no matter what in his sovereignty. And so many times we think that like, oh, okay, well, that's a story for Jonah's time. Like, no, God's still sovereign today. He still has his hand over your life. He still has his hand over your kid's life that may be wayward right now, just like Josiah was. Like, God's still in control, and don't give up. Don't give up praying. Don't give up seeking him. 2 a.m., be praying. Like, be there praying, knowing that God wants to do a work, and he wants to see all things work for his glory and his good. Yeah. So, Josiah, at this point, you're moved out. You're getting into some drugs. You're getting into more fame. What does your relationship status look like, and where does that take you?
Yeah, so I move out into my own apartment, and coincidentally, there was this... And this is it was funny because I actually prayed to God one night. I was like, "Lord, I really want like a relationship." And I was like, and I think my prayer was something like, I don't care if it's a godly woman, like I just want like a woman in my life. And that was like before I was moving out. And I think it was sort of because I was lonely. This is when COVID's going on. So I move out and I meet this girl who went to my high school who also has an OnlyFans, which is, the thing that I was promoting. So I started this relationship with her sort of just as like a professional relationship. But I actually began to fall for like her as a person, and she was struggling with a lot. And this is where and it's the term missionary dating, where it's like I wanted to like help her, like I wanted to save her. And at this point in the relationship, it wasn't with Christ or with God. It was I wanted to save her. Like I wanted to give her enough money so she would be happy. I wanted to take her on enough trips so she would be happy. I wanted to do enough drugs with her, drink enough so she would be happy. Like all these things, I was just trying to make her happy. And I realized really quickly that was only making things worse. Wow. So I was also taking medication for ADHD. It was Adderall. I actually do think I had ADHD at this time, and it did help a little bit when I was taking it the correct way, but I was abusing that, and we were smoking marijuana together, just a lot of drug abuse in that relationship, and sort of built this codependency around that. And then eventually I was like, okay, none of this is helping, like, let's cut this out. Yeah. And she was initially very reluctant, but, back in this time in my relationship, like I was very controlling, like, again, in my flesh, like wired out on Adderall, smoking marijuana, just so much like mental battle. And I wasn't in any place to try and lead this relationship spiritually, but I did try to do that. I told her, I was like, hey, let's try and cut out marijuana. Let's stop drinking. Let's stop vaping, like, let's start going to church. So I actually took her to church a few times and heard Pastor Kurt preach, and every time was just so convicted by the message. And this is when God started to really shift something in my heart, because I realized, okay, I want this girl to be better. Like, I want her to be happy. Like, I want her to have peace in her situation more than I want fame, more than I want fortune. The work that I was putting into my meme page, I stopped. Like, I started losing followers. Like, that was my main focus.
Yeah.
And God revealed to me that my deepest desire was to bring people peace, like the peace that only God can bring. And I tried to do that. It didn't really work in this relationship. And God revealed to me, Josiah, like, if you're going to walk in the purpose that I have for you, you can't be in this relationship. So everything really changed when I made the decision to, I remember I was lying in my bed.
Yeah.
And this was after, I had told this girl that I didn't want to like sleep with her at night anymore, so sleep somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I had prayed the prayer like, Lord, I can't break up with her, but I'm ready to submit to what you have for me. Like, I'm ready to go all in to serve you. Like, I want to do whatever you have planned for me. Like, my plans are not working.
Yep.
So you hear my heart. My only request, Lord, is that you would cause her to break up with me. Like, I can't break up with her right now. And the very next day, I mean, God showed up. Like, we got into this small argument over like laundry or something, and it escalated, and she said, you know what, I'm done. Like, she took all her stuff, she moved out, like, and I haven't talked with her since. And that was just so clearly God's hand of providence in my life.
Yeah. Wow. And at that time, you usually don't see those kind of things. Like, you see that breakup happening and you're like, wait, is this actually what I wanted? Is this the right thing right now?
Yep.
So asking for somebody might be in that position of like, all right, I clearly see a change. God's changing something. He's doing something inside of me. I see my circumstances around me changing. That setback is now becoming a setup in your life. So what would you tell somebody? Like, how did you hear God's voice? How did you know, okay, this is the right thing? As somebody who grew up in the faith, kind of walked away and came back, like, and it's this turning point right now. Like, how did you know that God was speaking to you?
Yeah, so I would say that, in my experience, and some people hear God's voice audibly, and, I long for the day that I have that experience, but God always speaks to me through circumstances and other people. So in this case, my parents were speaking into my life, like they knew the situation I was in, and they were loving. Like, it wasn't like a wrathful, like you need to turn back to God or you're going to go to hell, but it was like hey, we're here, like, we're praying for you, that kind of deal. And then of course there were some people, Blade was contacting me at this point, messaging me. So they were kind of sort of convicting me, like the conviction piece, but also God had been speaking to me. And I think this is where I look back and I say, okay, God was here all along.
Yeah.
He was sort of releasing me to some of these desires. Like, he was sort of letting me, chase this success, this fame, this women, the drugs, whatever, and see that it wasn't going to fulfill me. And I think,
just like your parents did, and that's amazing.
Right.
What an example.
Right. And I think I realized, so he was speaking to me as my desires started to change. And I think, the scripture talks about taking delight in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. In this time, as I started to actually take delight in him and try to perfect this or make this relationship holy and sanctified or whatever, in this time, I think the Lord really started to plant new desires in my heart and like give me a new vision for what my life could look like. Because, up until this point, I had a totally different idea of where I would be at.
Yeah, and it's like you're saying, like, as you seek the Lord, those desires change. Like, as you fall more in love with him, your desires go from more of trying to please myself, from something that's more prideful and self-fulfilling, but how can I please the Lord in what I'm doing?
Yeah.
So what are some steps then, as you have this like revelation in your life, this new way of thinking, what are some steps that you go to take then to take your life all in with God?
Yeah, so this was when, of course, this season was actually a darker season in my life. I was really depressed because I had just lost this relationship and was dealing with a lot of withdrawal from drugs and pornography and like addictions, all that stuff. So mentally, it was a bit of a state of turmoil, but my prayer was just continuously like, Lord, like, I'm submitted. And this is like my biggest piece of advice for anyone in this season is just take it day by day. Because I'd love to say that when I chose to go all in and do this, like, I'd love to say that everything I was struggling with, just broke off and I was perfect.
You surrender your life to the Lord and now everything's rainbows and sunshines.
No. And I still struggled with a lot. There were some areas of my life that there was deep rooted addictions and I was struggling with things still, but my heart had changed. Like, I was all in, and the Lord had a certain period of grace over my life in this time, and just his patience through this, because I really understood the scripture that talks about the Lord doesn't delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, but in a contrite, obedient heart.
Yeah.
I really understood what that meant. Like, I can read that scripture and be like, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, all he wanted was me submitted to his will. And it wasn't pretty for that first year. Like, it wasn't pretty. There was a lot of letting go of things. But slowly, my desires changed. I started to have a new vision, a new purpose for my life. And then this is where, like, 2 years into this, like, process, he places Highlands College on my heart. And I'm like, college? Like, what in the world,
Ministry.
Yeah. And I figured, like, maybe ministry was in the cards, but I didn't have money for college. Like, so Highlands College, I figure out, okay, maybe this is what I'm called to do. I'm supposed to go to ministry. And that was, and another way that God speaks to me is it's just a surety. Like, like there's some things in my life where if I'm not like, this is the right thing to do, I know it's not God. Like God, when God confirms something to me, it's such a confidence, and I know that that's what he's saying. It's again, it's not an audible voice, but it's like, there's assurance in that. And I knew that Highlands College was the next step. So I remember at the conference where I found out about it, I called my mom. I was like, Mom, I'm going to Highlands College in Alabama. And she's like, no, you're not. She's like, you don't have the money for that. Like, how are you going to make that happen? And I was like, God's going to provide. God's going to provide. And I had wanted to go that fall, but I ended up having to wait until the next fall. And I worked in construction, like 50-hour work weeks. It was miserable. I'm horrible at construction. That's not my gifting. I don't think I'm supposed to be building things, hopefully building people. But God had really just humbled me in that season. Like I was doing something I wasn't good at. Like I had only ever done things I was good at. And here I'm being humbled. And I remember my prayer through this whole season was like, redeem what I have broken, like redeem what I have broken. And that was just like a continuous prayer. And that's exactly what he began to do in this next season of my life at Highlands College. And just an incredible like bubble to be in for restoration, for training. I mean, it's great. It is an incredible environment, not something that you would want to live in because there's not a ton of lost people there. But it was great for where I was. And that's where the growth began to happen. Like I remember I was at a Men's Connect night, one of the first weeks I was there, and I felt like the Lord, leading up to this point for months, was asking me, to stop taking Adderall. And not that there's anything wrong with these kind of drugs. I think they're...
when they're prescribed and used correctly.
Right, and they're great for a season. And I wasn't even abusing it at this point, but I really felt like the Lord was calling me to stop taking it, to rely on him. Like he had something better for me. And I didn't understand it, but finally at a Men's Connect, I went up. It was like one of the first weeks there. And I was afraid that if I stopped taking it, I wouldn't be able to think clearly. Like there was a dependence there. So I went up to my friend Calvin, who I went down there with, and I was like, hey man, like, would you pray for me? Like he had no idea I was struggling with this. Like it was bad. I really felt like this tension of like, I know God's asking me to stop this, but I don't know if I like will be okay without it. And I told him it, and he prayed over me, he laid hands on me, and like that was a miracle because I stopped taking it, felt no withdrawal. Like it was like there was no problem there, and God so clearly provided a way out for me. And from that moment on, it was like game time. I was like, all right,
that's
like,
awesome.
Let's restore it. So I started to really seek like. And I set this standard for me. Like I wanted to graduate Highlands College with a 4.0. Like the reason for that wasn't for my glory, but it was because in high school I had like a 2.2. Like I didn't try, I didn't do anything. Like I wanted God to get the glory for like redeeming me. Like this is like God's redemption story.
Look what God can do.
Right. So I worked really hard for it, and another thing was, again, I always struggled with my weight, with self-control and discipline. And it's like, okay, like I'm not just going to run this half marathon that Highlands College is putting on. Like I'm going to win it. Like look what God can do. So I trained, and like God developed so much self-control and discipline in that season of training when I didn't want to do it. And I won it both times. I graduated with the academic instruction award from Highlands College. Like none of this stuff is something that I can do in my own power. Clearly, because I tried in my own power for a long time, but when you submit your life to God, like He will redeem what you think that you have broken. Like He will make whole what you have torn apart. Like He is the restorer. He is our redeemer. He is the restorer. Like it blows me away just talking about this. Like where I am today and where I was, only God can take me there.
Wow, that's incredible. So tell us now, just to recap as we're getting ready to close, like what is something that God's doing in your life right now? What would you tell yourself as you're looking back now to that, that boy that was starting to just feel the pressures of the world starting to hit him at such a young age?
Yeah.
What would you tell him, and what's God doing right now in your life?
Yeah, I would say reality is so much more important than image. You know, at this point in my life, I think that speaks true to me, and I wish that I understood that at a younger age.
Yeah.
Like, from the day that I was introduced to pornography, like, if I would have just told someone, like, if I would have stopped trying to build this image, if I would have just opened up and told somebody, I would not have gone through this period of my life that, you know, it wasn't wasted. God redeemed it, but you know, I could have saved myself a lot of hurt and a lot of time that I didn't need to go through that pain. You know, so focus more on being real with people. Like, don't focus about building an image, because when you're real, the image will build itself, and it's not your image. It's God's image, and that's what we want, is to be shown in the image of God, not our own image, but in God's image. Yeah.
So fast forward now to the year 2024. What's God doing in your life right now?
Yeah. So currently I'm, on staff at Victory Church, which just an incredible answered prayer. Actually, something that I really felt the Lord told me was going to happen as I was going down to Highlands College, and just incredible to see God's faithfulness in providing the opportunity to be here. It's an incredible staff, and I'm married now. My wife Kaylee Bender, she's currently, I think, ending her internship here at Victory, but she helps over at the Ephrata campus, and she loves ministry. I actually met her at Highlands College, and just God's faithfulness in providing a wife too, even though I blew it twice in relationships. It's like His faithfulness and just redeeming what was broken. Again, it's just, it blows me away.
Yep, that's so good. Awesome. Well, thank you, Josiah, for being here today. Thank you for sharing this incredible story of God's redemption in your life. And I pray that through this story, somebody's encouraged, whether it's a young person, whether it's an old person, wherever they're at in that journey or in their journey. I pray that they're encouraged by this and encouraged to see that God hasn't forgotten them, that His sovereignty has reign over all, and to take that next step, as no matter how hard it might be, from giving up money on the memes page to now doing construction, whatever that looks like, take that step of faith, because God's faithfulness will follow along. So thank you guys for joining and listening today. We hope you have a blessed day, and join us next week for another episode. God bless. Thank you for joining us on this episode of This Is My Story. Hearing these incredible accounts of God's work in our lives reminds us of the enduring power of faith. If you've been moved by these stories, don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube. And don't forget to share the inspiration with others who might need it. This Is My Story is recorded at Victory Church in the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. You can learn more about This Is My Story and Victory Church in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and be blessed.